Coming to paperback and e-readers in 2021, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks on a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business in 2021 at online booksellers everywhere. One of the things a comic book writer, a manga writer, a science fiction writer, and a fantasy writer have to do is invest in high stakes for their story. Now, what is investing in high stakes for a story? Investing in high stakes for a story is creating a conflict or series of conflicts that appear to be next to impossible for the hero to overcome. Now, the reason why a writer wants to create a series of conflicts that appear to be next to impossible for the hero to overcome is because they want the reader to be invested in the story early on. And when you set high stakes for a story, what that does is get readers starting to ask critical questions about that story early on. And if you can get a reader to start asking questions like, how does he overcome these odds? How does he beat these bad guys? What you're going to do is get that reader invested into that story, invested in gambling their time on those high stakes, and get them to care enough about that story to pick that story up. Now, I use high stakes storytelling whenever I write a fantasy story on my SJS Direct imprint. And back in 2005, when I was writing The Temptation of John Haynes, I started using the high stakes model for The Temptation of John Haynes. Now, in The Temptation of John Haynes, I had the John Haynes character, an average, ordinary guy, taking on Lucifer, the Lord of Hell, and his assistant Esteem, who was sent to seduce him and take his soul. And it appeared to be next to impossible for John Haynes to be able to beat Lucifer, especially that since he made him his CEO of one of his corporations and then placed Esteem there as his assistant to assist him and seduce him. So it seemed like the deck was stacked in Lucifer's favor, but that's one of the things that made the story so compelling, was seeing how the John Haynes character was going to overcome the odds that were stacked against him and be able to overcome that environment where he was tempted by these riches and this attractive woman and be tempted to make this compromise to take his soul. So there were a lot of obstacles in the John Haynes character's way, and the John Haynes character, we were trying to ask the question, how does he overcome these odds? And that's what you really want the reader to do when they're reading your story, and that's the thing that's going to motivate them to finish that story from the first page all the way to the last. So you really want to set big stakes for your characters, because when you set big stakes for your characters, your readers start to get involved in the story early on, and they start caring about the story, they start caring about the characters, and they become endeared to the characters because as they see them overcoming these odds, what they do is they start to really like these characters because this character has found a way out of a situation where they thought there was no way. Now, another example of me setting high stakes for a story was back in 2014 when I wrote the story Isis: Wrath of the Cyber Goddess. Now, when I wrote this story, I wanted to create a challenge for the Isis character to overcome, because just putting her up against gods and demons was fairly becoming dull to me, because the stakes already were set for those stories and practically concluded. So I wanted to create a villain that Isis would have a hard time overcoming. So I came up with this cyber goddess character who was coveted Isis's beauty and coveted being a god, and she became a god using technology and made herself into a cyborg. And that was a character that really set high stakes, because here was a character who had powers equal to Isis, or practically higher than Isis, because she came from technology and had a theory of evolution, and this was going against Isis and the theocratic order that she came from. So this was creating a conflict where the Isis character had to overcome this super-powered cyborg with these incredible powers that were possibly even greater than Isis's powers, and setting up a big major conflict between Isis and the cyber goddess, and asking the reader, how does the goddess next door overcome this cyber goddess who has this powers over technology and has access to incredible arsenals of weapons? How does she overcome this incredibly powerful villain? And that was a setup for a big premise. And again, I wanted to set it up big because when your heroes have someone tough to overcome, then the reader gets invested in the story, and they get invested to the point where they care to read this story all the way to the end. Because once you set up really high stakes for your story, the reader, when they see the cover, they're going to be like, wow, that looks really, really cool. I want to see how this turns out. And they're looking at the cover and going, I want to see how this hero overcomes this bad guy, and I really want to see how they beat this bad guy. I mean, if you set up really high stakes, the reader gets invested early on, and then they get so excited about what they're reading because this hero is having a challenge put in front of them that they care to see how this hero beats this challenge. Now, examples of this can be seen in films like Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker, again, an average, ordinary farm boy, has to face all of these challenges, such as dealing with the guys in the Moss Cantina, dealing with the trash compactor, dealing with, in other movies like Empire Strikes Back, dealing with that big white monster, and even dealing with his father. So the George Lucas set big high stakes for Luke Skywalker, and Luke Skywalker had to overcome all of those odds. And that's what made him a very compelling character, and that's what made him a very endearing character. The fact that he was placed in the face of all of this great adversity and managed to overcome all of that great adversity. And that adversity, or those high stakes, were the thing that made that character an icon. And you really want to make your character face these challenges, because these challenges are the thing that test the mettle of your hero, and these are the things that grow your character internally and externally. Because when I was writing Temptation of John Haynes, and I wrote the John Haynes character in the beginning, the John Haynes character was an introvert and a loner, and he had, in order for him to survive in that corporate hell, he had to develop social skills, interpersonal skills, and critical thinking skills in order to overcome Lucifer and Easti. And the same thing with the Isis character in Isis Wrath of the Cyber Goddess. I had to create internal conflict with the Isis character, who was dealing with her feelings of inadequacy and struggling with her fears about doing harm to someone over the course of that story. So whenever you set high stakes, you not only have the external conflict for the hero to overcome, you also have the internal issues that the hero has to overcome over the course of that story. So high stakes allow us to see this character's mettle tested, and it allows us to see if this character has the grit and resolve to overcome the odds, and it also allows us to see this character grow as they overcome those odds and grow to see that they can go out here and beat the challenge placed in front of them. So when you set high stakes for a character, it really gives them something to be able to work towards. It gives them a goal to work towards, which is not only beating the bad guy, but beating themselves internally and being able to grow to become a better person overall. So high stakes really challenge a character. High stakes really help a character grow. And when you set high stakes and you give your character a challenge, what you're doing is creating something that allows the reader to learn from the character and learn from their experiences in that story. Now, one of the big problems I have with the comic book industry these days is many writers are too afraid to set high stakes. Many comic book writers, what they will do instead of setting high stakes is create easy challenges for the hero to overcome. And when you go out there and you're a writer and you do this, this is a sign of insecurity because you don't have the confidence in your character to beat the odds. Now, a good writer, they are going to set high stakes for their character because they want to see their character overcome those odds, and they want to see how that character works in an environment where they have to go out here and think of a way to beat the bad guys. They don't want easy challenges because easy challenges don't really get us a reason to see how this character works. Excuse me. And when you have easy challenges, it really does not really give us a way to connect with this character, because the way we connect with characters is through their flaws and them working through their flaws. So if you have a character, for example, like a Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, or a Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, who can practically beat everyone, then there's no stakes in that story. And if there are no stakes in that story, there's no reason for the reader to invest in that story, and no reason for the reader to care about that story. Because if I know that the hero is going to be able to beat the bad guy easily, then there's no reason for me to pick up that book and buy the current book, or even be interested enough in the character to pick up the back books that were previously published about that character, or anticipate the next book in the series. So it's very important for a publisher to go out here and invest in high stakes for their characters, because when you invest in high stakes for your characters, you are creating an investment in the reader, and the reader has something to invest in because they want to see how this story ends. And if they want to see how this story ends and they get excited about this story, what you're going to do is build up the anticipation for that next story and possibly get that reader excited enough to go pick up the backstories of said character. And that's what you want from a sales perspective, because if readers are excited enough about a hero's stories, what they're going to do is, again, go out here looking for that next story with anticipation, and they're going to start searching for the backstories of these characters. And when it came down to characters like John Haynes and Isis, people were so compelled by these character stories that they were looking for the new stories, and they were also looking for the backstories. And I've had people, after reading one John Haynes story or one Isis story, go out here and pick up the entire run. And that's the payoff for a publisher when they go out here and invest in high stakes storytelling, because high stakes storytelling gives the reader a challenge, and when you challenge the reader, they want to come back for more stories because they want to see the hero overcoming the odds. And that's the big payoff for them, is seeing them find some creative way to overcome those odds and beat the bad guys. They don't want to see a hero going out here and having a squash match where they beat jobbers. They want to see major challenges where the hero has to overcome a major threat and find a way to get the victory where they could not find a victory. So whenever you're writing a comic book, a manga, science fiction, or fantasy, pay attention to your conflict and make sure that your challenges are very hard to overcome, because the harder it is for the hero to overcome, the more compelling the story is, and the more actively involved the reader will be in the story. And when readers are actively involved in the story and they really care about the story and the characters, you can build a word of mouth, and that word of mouth is the thing that will allow you to build your story and your character into a brand. Now, if you want to try some of the books on the SJS Direct imprint, like The Temptation of John Haynes and Isis Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And you can find the Isis series and the John Haynes series on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find Isis and John Haynes books on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers this April, Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door must take on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess in paperback and e-readers this April.